Well, it was always about, how are you going to find a way to fit in, right? Always, battling for acceptance. Uh, just knowing that, I didn't look like everybody else. So, what was I going to do to feel accepted, to fit in with the group? And, there was, it was challenging at times. And again, that wears on your confidence and, how you feel as yourself. 'Cause you never know how really people are going to accept you, or what they're thinking of you. So there's always, something that's always been kind of in the back of my mind. Yeah, let me start with my dad. And my dad just continually reminded me every time that I went out, whether it was to school, whether it was to church, or even to play hockey, reminded me that I had to be extra special and, make sure that I behaved extra special because, the color of my skin, people were going to be looking at me. And I remember his exact words is, "You're going to stick out like a sore thumb if you don't behave." So it's just always something that, was always in the back of my mind, that I guess maybe that was his way to motivate me to, uh, make sure that my behavior is on point all the time. And, again, growing up, and that other couple stories there that we briefed on, talked to you about the lady across the street. Again, we talked about the neighborhood that I grew up in, the predominantly, white neighborhood. Uh, and there was a lot of good people in that neighborhood, don't get me wrong, but there was a older lady across the street, her and her husband, who anytime I'd be out playing, had to remind me of the color of my skin, calling me a little gingerbread boy or a little black boy. And these were basically, I was a younger kid. These were basically unprovoked taunts that, she just threw at me. And it was mainly her, not so much her husband, but, just stuff like that that we always had. And I remember telling my mom about that. And my mom would always tell us, and that's probably the person in my life that I derive the most strength from, is, "Oh, don't worry about that old lady. She's just, she's not a good person. Just stay away from her." So that we did. We never had any rebuttal back to her. And then going back on the last story here too, just talking about, I remember playing his day at East Elmwood Community Club, and at those days we predominantly played all our games outside. And I was a pretty good hockey player at that point in time. I could skate and do some things on the ice. And I remember this lady up in the snowbank, because we never had the full glass around the rink. It was just wire mesh kind of behind both ends at the nets. So skating down the ice, and I heard, "Get lady, get that little black boy, get that little nigger boy," lady saying to me. And so she taunted me enough during the game, and I snapped back at her. I told her to F off. And I was completely wrong of myself at that point in time. And my coach ended up getting wind of that. But the striking part about that is, I felt bad as a young hockey player, that I did something wrong, and said something I probably shouldn't have said. And I take full responsibility and ownership to that. But there was never anything said to her about making the racial taunts back at that time, in the, probably in the mid '70s when I was growing up. So those are just some interesting, things and that I had to go through. I remember this one kid at school, tough, raggedy kid named Brad Mazer, just reminded me every day, calling me a chocolate bar and a Hershey bar every single day when he saw me at school, just completely unprovoked. So those are some of the things, that I had to kind of, be strong to, and build up my immunity uh, to as I grew up. Well, let me tell you first off, when you get those racial taunts all the time, continuing from the same, ignorant people, you kind of get an immunity to them. Yeah, I'd snap back and say things, but you get a bit of immunity. And obviously, with my mother, just telling myself, and even my sisters, just ignore people like that. So we got, we just ended up ignoring a lot of that. But and that was growing up again when I was a young kid in the mid '70s in elementary school. But there's another interesting story here that stuck out when I was playing pro hockey. And I remember lining up, and we were playing in Indianapolis one night, and one of the guy was just chirping me, calling me this, calling me that, black this and this and this. And I remember one guy, and I ended up working for this guy. I don't want to bring up the name, but I ended up working for this guy later on that stuck up for me. And he was giving me this, giving me that, just about being black and I'm going to get you, da, 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 da. And I remember the guy that I ended up working with just telling me that, you know, just ignore him. He's an idiot. You know, he's just talking. You know, it's not right. So that was pretty interesting. That, and you know, I ended up working with him, and I'll mention his name. It was Dave Allison. A number of years later, stuck up for me. I think for sure people should say something if they see something, and now especially when a lot of the stuff had been going on, and I think we've hit a tipping point with obviously the George Floyd situation. That, you know, silence is almost like you're compliant in somewhat. And maybe that was not so much the case back in, you know, my days when I was getting some of that, you know, some of those racial slurs hurled at me. But now more than ever, I think, you know, we have to make sure that we step up and say something and help out, because again, as we go on in this world, the reality is, you know, the white person in America, and I heard some interesting stat that by 2035 or something, the white people might be the minority. So, you know, we have to stand up and you know, for one another, and get ready to live in a more diverse environment, more so than ever, because we're starting to trend that way in America as, you know, time goes on. Like, I'm a big believer you're a product of the environment that you're in, and I think your parents have to be a good example. And sometimes some of these things that parents might say or do in front of their kid that they probably learned when they were younger, that had no effect on the implications on different races, and now their kids are hearing them, and now their kids are starting to get a little bit jaded towards, you know, what they're saying. And I think that's kind of how it all comes around. Some of the things you see, you know, on TV. I mean, some of the things now that you're witnessing, even with this current presidential regime that's in power, that there's a lot of you know, racial undertones, microaggressions towards racist people, and that's, you know, kids pick that up and they grow and they get these beliefs in their mind about, you know, different races and how they are, and that's, I believe, how, you know, the whole racism, how the whole racism thing just kind of perpetuates itself. So there's got to be a, you know, a stop in education to start educating the people of the future here on, you know, how we can break that cycle and how we can become more racial, uh, more racial tolerant, and, you know, get rid of some of the racial stereotypes that we have on different people. I honestly think, Vals, the biggest thing that these people nowadays really have to understand is the story of every, you know, person of color, especially, you know, we'll use hockey because I'm in hockey, and just some of the battles that they have gone through. When I listen to the Hockey Diversity Alliance guys, and I listen to some of the stories that they have, I can empathize with all their stories because I've been through all that stuff. And I think as a society now, as a teammate, for those people to understand and recognize some of the battles that, you know, all of the black players had to go through to get to where they are, some of the, you know, not only the racial, I guess, racial slurs and, you know, belittling of a person of color, but even some of the challenges that a person of color has is growing up in today's world. And I think when people start understanding, you know, some of the disadvantages that we have, that they'll have a better understanding, more empathy, and certainly, you know, have a better feeling for what we've gone through to get to where we've gone through. And it's been a little bit harder. It's been a challenge at times for all of us. You know, I was listening to a podcast probably 2 months ago, listening to on TSN about a young player in the Greater Toronto Hockey Association. and he's still getting racial taunts. Said on a podcast, and I said, "Wow!" I was pretty shocked about that because I thought most of that stuff was gone out of the game because I mean now we're talking about the 2020, and I'm talking about going back to like 19 70 75 back in that time. And I was amazed listening to him. Miles Douglas was his name, and I said when I got off the podcast, wow, I said that shit's still happening. That's unbelievable. I thought most of that stuff was out of the game now. But when I look at some of the things in the racial segregation in today's society, I learn about redlining different communities, gerrymandering, voter suppression for people of color, and all this stuff that's been going on in the U.S. for years. The Jimmy Crow laws, and when I look at all this stuff, and I said, "Wow!" I said, "It really is." It really is true, because a person of color is trying to get on base with a broken bat, whereas as a white Caucasian person has a great bat, and they have no great opportunity to get on base. We're trying to get to trying to get to home plate, and we're so disadvantaged right at even the start that it's harder. So we have to work twice as hard just to get to where we want to go. Just trying to break down the racial barriers and racial stereotypes some people have, in their mind about, people of color. But also the one thing that we all have to do, we have to listen. We have to listen and understand people's different backgrounds and where they've come from. And that's going to give us a better understanding of the person and who they are. And we need to also give them a chance, because some of these people that you're talking about that have different, obviously, color, different sexual preference, some of them are just great people. But sometimes you're jaded, you have a stereotype, and you don't even give them a chance. So, to me, listen, give people a chance.
Yeah.